The morning light came through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace like it always did, quiet, golden, and unbothered by whatever was happening inside. The staff moved through the corridors with the careful silence of people who had learned, over many years, that the walls had ears and the carpets remembered every footstep. Princess Anne was already awake. She had been awake since 5, as she always was. No fuss. No drama. A cup of tea, her horses checked, her schedule reviewed. She was not a woman who wasted mornings on sentiment. At 73, she had seen enough of palace life to know that the most dangerous hours were not the public ones, not the ceremonies, not the speeches, but the private gatherings. The lunches. The dinners. The rooms where cameras were not allowed and people forgot themselves. That afternoon was one of those rooms. It was a private reception at Clarence's house. Small. Curated. The kind of event that looked, from the outside, like a simple family gathering to mark a charitable milestone. Inside, it was the usual careful dance, people smiling at each other across old wounds, glasses raised over unspoken histories, everyone performing their version of unity for an audience of each other. Kate arrived exactly on time. She came in wearing a simple navy dress, her hair down, her smile easy and practiced. She had learned, in more than a decade inside this family, how to wear a room like a second skin. She greeted people warmly. She remembered names. She asked about children and causes and trips abroad, and she meant every word of it, which was the thing that made her good at it. There was no performance in Kate's warmth. It was simply who she was. She did not see Tom Parker Bowles standing near the drinks table until she was already close. Tom was Camilla's son. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of a man who had grown up adjacent to privilege without ever having to fully earn it himself. He was a food critic. A writer. Charming in the way that certain men are charming, loudly, and in the direction of whoever happened to be listening. That afternoon, several people were listening. He was in the middle of a story when Kate approached to greet him. The polite thing. The expected thing. She extended her hand and smiled and said something warm and unremarkable, the kind of greeting that should have lasted 10 seconds and been forgotten. Tom looked at her. Then he said, loud enough for the small cluster of people around him to hear, that it must be wonderful to have so much time for charity work now that the harder duties were being handled by others. He smiled as he said it. The smile was the worst part. It dressed the words in something that looked like humor but was not. The room did not gasp. Rooms like that never gasp. What they do is shift, a slight stiffening of shoulders, a sudden interest in the middle distance, a collective decision made wordlessly to pretend the moment had not happened. 2 people near the window turned away. A member of staff became very focused on a tray of glasses that did not need adjusting. Kate's smile did not falter. That was the extraordinary thing. It simply held there on her face, steady and calm, while behind her eyes something moved that no one in that room could name with confidence. She had been in enough of these moments to know that flinching was a gift you did not give freely. She said something gracious and light and moved on, and her hands were perfectly still at her sides. Across the room, Princess Anne had heard every word. And had not been looking in that direction when it happened. She rarely looked directly at anything she was monitoring. It was a skill built over decades, the ability to absorb everything in a room without appearing to watch it. She had been speaking with a member of a charitable trust, a pleasant woman named Margaret who was explaining the outcomes of a water sanitation project in East Africa. And was genuinely interested in the project. She kept her attention on Margaret. But she had heard. She finished the conversation with Margaret at exactly the pace she would have finished it regardless. She thanked her. She asked one follow-up question. She accepted a refill of her sparkling water from a passing tray. And then she moved through the room with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew exactly where they were going and did not need anyone to move out of their way, because people simply did. Tom was still near the drinks table. His group had reshuffled slightly. He was laughing at something someone else had said. And came to stand beside him. Not opposite him. Not confrontationally. Simply beside him, as though she had arrived to join the conversation, which was the most unsettling possible position for the person being corrected, because there was nowhere to direct defensiveness. She accepted a drink. She smiled pleasantly at the group. Then, without any change in her tone whatsoever, she said she had caught the tail end of his comment to the Princess of Wales. She said it was a curious observation, given how much the Princess of Wales had accomplished in the last several years, particularly in the area of early childhood development. She said she believed it took a certain kind of confidence to make that kind of remark at a family gathering, and that she admired confidence when it was founded on something solid. She looked at Tom then. Directly. The way she looked at horses that were misbehaving, not with anger, but with a calm, absolute clarity that communicated exactly one thing: I have been doing this since before you were born, and I am not going to raise my voice. The group around Tom had gone very quiet. Tom opened his mouth. He said something about how it was only a bit of fun, a joke, that surely everyone knew he meant nothing by it. He laughed. The laugh sounded different from his earlier ones. Slightly hollow. Like something that had been produced because the situation required one, rather than because anything was funny. And nodded slowly. She said she was sure that was true. She said humor was a wonderful thing and that she had always believed the best humor brought people together rather than reminded them of their place. She said it with complete pleasantness. She said it the way a person says something that is both a compliment and a door being firmly, quietly closed. Then she asked Tom how his work was going. The subject change was the final thing. It was the move of someone who did not need the moment to be acknowledged any further, because the moment had already been handled. Tom, slightly off balance, talked about a book project. And asked a polite question. He answered. Someone else in the group contributed something. The conversation moved on the way conversations do when the dangerous part of them is over. Tom Parker Bowles did not make another remark like that for the rest of the afternoon. On the other side of the room, Kate stood near a window with a glass of water in her hand, speaking to a woman she knew from one of her foundation's partner organizations. The conversation was about children. About the specific ways that early experiences shape a life. Kate listened carefully, the way she always did, with her full attention and none of the distraction that a person carrying an unresolved humiliation might naturally feel. She did not know, in that moment, exactly what Anne had said to Tom. She would hear a version of it later, passed along through the quiet and reliable channels that exist in every family, royal or otherwise. She would not say much in response. She would simply nod, and something in her expression would settle, the way a landscape settles after a wind passes through it. What she did know, standing there by the window, was that the room had shifted. She could feel it. The slight recalibration of attention, the way certain people glanced in her direction now with something warmer than before, the way Tom Parker Bowles no longer looked in her direction at all. These were the small signals. The ones that mattered. Camilla, for her part, had been on the other side of the reception for much of this. She had been speaking with a group near the fireplace, doing what she did well, laughing easily, putting people at ease, carrying her role with the practiced lightness of someone who had worked hard to make it look natural. She was, by most measures, good at this now. It had not always been the case, and everyone in the room carried some version of that history in the back of their minds, but the present was the present and Camilla was the queen and she moved through the afternoon with grace. She had not heard Tom's original remark. She did not know, until much later, what her son had said or what Anne had done in response. When she found out, quietly, from someone who had been present, she sat with it for a long moment. She was a woman who had lived through enough scrutiny to understand that your children's behavior reflects on you in ways you cannot always control and cannot always prevent. Tom was 49 years old. He was not a child who needed correcting. He was a man who had said something careless in a room full of people who noticed everything. She did not make a public statement. She did not send a note of apology, because there was no formal channel through which such a note would travel without becoming its own kind of story. What she did was smaller than that, and perhaps more meaningful. The next time she and Kate were in the same room together, she made a point of crossing it. She said something simple. Warm. Direct. The kind of thing that could not be quoted or contextualized or turned into a headline, because it was only two women in a corridor, one of them reaching toward the other with the only thing she had available, which was sincerity. Kate received it the way she received most things, with grace, and without making a performance of the grace. Princess Anne, when asked later by a member of her household about the afternoon, said only that it had been a pleasant reception and that the charitable organization being honored had done genuinely important work. She asked that the follow-up details from Margaret's water sanitation project be sent to her office. She had questions she wanted answered. She did not mention Tom. She did not mention Kate. She did not mention the moment by the drinks table. She did not need to. This is the thing about Princess, and that people who have not watched her carefully sometimes miss. She is not a woman who makes scenes. She is not a woman who needs recognition for the corrections she makes or the standards she holds. She has been part of this institution for over half a century, and she understands it in a way that very few people alive still do, not the ceremony of it, not the protocol of it, but the actual architecture of it. The way it holds. The weight it can bear and the weight it cannot. What she had understood, standing beside Tom Parker Bowles near the drinks table, was not complicated. A woman had been diminished in a room where she deserved to stand with full dignity. The woman had handled it with more composure than most people could have managed. And someone with the standing to say something had been close enough to say it quietly, without drama, without escalation, without the thing becoming a story that would follow everyone involved for the next 5 years. So she had said it. And then she had moved on. That is the version of power that doesn't photograph well. It does not arrive with visible impact. There is no moment of obvious triumph, no satisfying confrontation, no clip that travels. It is instead the steady, unspectacular work of someone who has decided, a long time ago, what they believe is right and who acts accordingly without requiring an audience. Kate drove back to Adelaide Cottage that evening with the windows down slightly, the English countryside moving past in the long flat light of a late afternoon. She was tired in the way that social events that require sustained emotional management always leave you tired, regardless of how well they go. Her protection officer drove. The radio was off. She thought about her children. About the project her team was presenting next week. About what she was going to make for dinner. She did not spend very much time thinking about Tom Parker Bowles or what he had said, because she had learned, slowly, over more years than she would have chosen to spend learning it, that the remarks that are meant to make you feel small only have that power for as long as you give them space inside your own head. And she was, at this point in her life, somewhat deliberate about what she allowed to take up space. She was also, though she would never have said it in these terms, aware that she had not been alone in that room. That mattered. It mattered not because she needed protecting, she did not, and had proven as much more times than anyone had formally counted, but because there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being the person in the room who absorbs the small cruelties in silence and is expected to absorb them beautifully. And there is a specific kind of relief that comes from discovering you are not as alone in that as you sometimes feel. Princess Anne would not have called what she did that afternoon loyalty. She would not have called it defense. If you asked her directly, she would have said something practical, that standards of behavior at private family engagements were not optional, and that she had simply said so. Which was true. It was also, in the particular language of that world, in those corridors, among those people, everything. The palace that evening settled into its usual quiet. The lights came on in the upper rooms. The staff moved through the corridors. Outside, the city carried on entirely without awareness of what had happened in a small room over glasses of sparkling water and polite conversation, the moment that had lasted perhaps 45 seconds, spoken in a tone that never once rose above normal, and had nonetheless said everything that needed saying. Some things do not need to be loud to land. Some people have spent their whole lives understanding that. Princess Anne drove back to Gatcombe Park as the sun went down, her mind already on tomorrow.